I never thought helping someone could turn into something this complicated. It started so innocently. My husband had asked me to spend more time at home since he was traveling so often, and it made sense. We'd been distant for a while, not in an angry way, just cold, like roommates who used to be in love. We barely spoke unless it was about bills, dinner, or family obligations. So when his son moved back in after finishing college, I didn't think much of it. My stepson and I had always gotten along fine. Polite, respectful, a little reserved but always thoughtful. He was working on building his freelance business from home, spending hours every day buried in his laptop in the upstairs office. One night, I brought him tea. That's how it started. A simple mug of peppermint tea. He looked up, surprised but grateful. "Thanks," he said. "I've been staring at this for hours. I'm completely stuck." I asked what he was working on, and he explained it was a project for a client, some copywriting and layout work, something I had a bit of experience in. I offered to take a look. 15 minutes turned into an hour. I sat beside him, pointing out layout changes, helping shape better sentences. He was focused, curious, asking for feedback and nodding along attentively. It was strange how natural it felt. Easier than with my husband, honestly. He listened. Really listened. After that, it became a habit. Every other evening, I'd bring tea or coffee, sit beside him, and help review his work. We didn't talk about anything too personal. It was always about the project until it wasn't. The silence between sentences started to feel charged. Sometimes his knee would brush mine under the table. Accidental, of course. But it lingered a second too long. He started thanking me more, telling me how helpful I was, how no one had ever taken that much time for him before. It made me uncomfortable in a way that didn't feel wrong, just unfamiliar. I hadn't heard that kind of appreciation in years. My husband hadn't complimented me on anything, not dinner, not my hair, not even a passing remark, for months, maybe longer. One night, I wore a blouse I hadn't put on in ages. I don't even know why. It wasn't low-cut or suggestive, just flattering. I noticed him glance at me when I walked into the room. He tried to hide it, but his eyes paused for half a second longer than usual. "I like that color on you," he said. I blinked. "Oh, thank you." It caught me off guard. He wasn't flirting. At least, not obviously. But my pulse kicked up a notch. That was the first time I realized I was enjoying his company too much. I told myself it was just because I was lonely. He was younger, enthusiastic, made me feel needed. It didn't mean anything. That night, he asked if I wanted to stay while he made some tweaks. I said I couldn't. I practically ran out of the room. Over the next week, I tried to avoid helping. I told him I was busy. I buried myself in books, reorganized the pantry, started watching mindless shows I didn't care about. But then I heard him coughing late one night and instinctively walked up with a warm drink. He smiled when he saw me. "I thought I scared you off." I laughed a little too quickly. "Of course not. Just been tired."
Same.
"I've been stuck on this for hours. Could use a second opinion." I should have said no, but I didn't. We sat down again, side by side. The desk light cast a soft glow, his voice low and steady as he read lines aloud. His hand brushed mine again when he passed the mouse over. I didn't move this time. "You always smell nice," he said suddenly. I stared at the screen. "That's inappropriate." He paused.
Sorry.
"Just being honest." I didn't respond. My heart was beating too loud. I closed the file and stood up. "That's enough for tonight," I said. He looked disappointed but nodded. "Good night." I didn't sleep well. I kept replaying the sound of his voice. The softness in the way he said it. He wasn't playing some game. He genuinely meant it. That scared me more than anything else. The next day, I avoided eye contact. At dinner, my husband barely said 2 words. He scrolled on his phone the whole time. When I brought up how long he'd be gone next week, he just muttered something about a new client and travel delays. My stepson, across the table, was quiet but kept glancing at me. I felt warm under his gaze, like I was being seen. Later that week, he left a small post-it note on my desk. "Thank you for everything." That was it. No name, No flirting. Just simple gratitude. I held on to that little piece of paper longer than I should have. When I found him working outside in the backyard a few days later, I brought out a pitcher of lemonade without thinking. He looked up and grinned. I was hoping you'd come out. I handed him a glass. Thought you might be thirsty. He wiped sweat from his brow. It's hotter than it looks. I sat on the step, trying not to stare at the way his shirt clung to his back.
He sat beside me. Close.
Too close. You seem different lately, he said quietly. I glanced at him. Different how? More quiet, like you're thinking a lot. I always think a lot. Yeah, but now it feels like you're thinking about me. I stood up. Too fast. I should get back inside. He stood too. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. I'm married to your father, I snapped. He took a step back. I know. We stared at each other for a long moment. I hated how much I didn't hate what he said. I hated that he was right. I went inside and shut the door. My hands were shaking. I told myself this needed to stop. That night, I told my husband we should do something together that weekend. Just the two of us. He looked confused. This weekend? I've got meetings. You know that. I nodded.
Of course I did.
Back in my room, I found the note again. Folded it. Put it in a drawer. But I didn't throw it away. A few days later, my stepson knocked gently on the door while I was reading. He looked hesitant. I just wanted to say, thank you for not telling him. I know I crossed a line. I shook my head. It's not about that. Just, let's not make things worse. He nodded. Okay. He turned to leave, but before he did, he looked back at me.
His voice softer this time.
I don't want to mess anything up. I don't know how to stop thinking about you. The door clicked shut behind him. I sat there, staring at the empty hallway, and realized I didn't know how to stop either. I wasn't supposed to feel this way. I wasn't supposed to notice the way he smelled after a shower, or how his eyes crinkled when he laughed. I wasn't supposed to feel this alive around someone who wasn't my husband. But I did. And deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of it. It was the beginning. I tried to bury it. That kiss he gave me the other night, quick, desperate, and completely wrong, I tried to pretend it didn't happen. I avoided him. Left the room if he entered. Answered only with short nods and polite, hollow words. But my body betrayed me. Every time I heard his footsteps, my heart reacted before my mind could shut it down. I could still feel the pressure of his lips, the warmth of his breath. He hadn't said anything since. Maybe he was ashamed. Maybe he regretted it. I didn't know.
I didn't ask.
One morning, he passed me in the hallway. He didn't stop, didn't look, just said, sorry. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I didn't trust what might come out. A few days later, I found myself checking the clock, wondering when he'd be home. When I realized what I was doing, I slammed the door shut. This had to end. It already went too far. But when he got home that evening and walked into the kitchen, the look in his eyes stopped me cold. He wasn't avoiding me anymore. He looked resolved. Can we talk? He asked. I nodded. We walked into the den. I stayed standing. He sat. I'm sorry, he said again. But I'm not going to pretend I don't feel what I feel. You don't know what you feel, I said sharply. I do. I think about you all the time. I know it's wrong. I'm not asking you to feel the same. I just couldn't act like I didn't care. I looked at him and saw everything I was missing in my own marriage. Attentiveness, presence, emotion. He was reckless, but he was honest. And I hated how much I wanted to believe him. I'm married to your father, I repeated, not because I needed him to hear it, but because I needed to remind myself. He didn't reply, just nodded, and left. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay next to my husband, staring at the ceiling. He was snoring lightly, unaware of everything that was unraveling right next to him. I turned to face the wall and bit down hard on my tongue until I tasted blood. I had to get control of this. But control was already gone. The next week was tense. The air in the house had changed. We barely spoke unless necessary. My husband was preparing for another trip, barely home. It made things worse. Or maybe easier. I couldn't tell anymore. On Thursday, it rained. Heavy, loud, persistent. The kind of storm that made the house feel smaller. I was cleaning up after dinner when the lights flickered, then went out completely. I called out, heard his voice upstairs. We met in the hallway, both holding our phones as flashlights. Well, he said, guess we're stuck. I didn't respond. I walked to the kitchen, grabbed candles. He followed. We ended up in the living room, candles flickering around us, the storm drowning out the silence. He poured 2 glasses of wine. I shouldn't have accepted, but I did. You okay? He asked. I'm fine. I lied. He looked at me. Really looked. You don't seem fine. I sighed. It's complicated. He nodded.
Yeah.
It is. We sat in silence. Then, as if pulled by a magnet, I turned toward him. He was already watching me. I haven't felt like this in a long time, I whispered, more to myself than to him. He leaned in, slowly, giving me time to pull away. I didn't. I should have. But I didn't. Our lips met again. Softer this time. No rush. Just quiet hunger. And when I finally pulled back, I didn't say anything. I just sat there, staring at the glass in my hands. I'm sorry, he said again. You keep saying that, I muttered. Because I keep meaning it. We didn't speak the rest of the night. The lights came back an hour later. I went to bed. But I didn't sleep. The guilt settled into my bones like a disease. It followed me everywhere. When I made breakfast. When I folded laundry. When I stood next to my husband, answering his questions about the upcoming fundraiser like everything was normal. It wasn't. A few days later, my stepson left a printed draft of a new project on the dining table. Can you take a look? He asked. I shouldn't have said yes. But I did. We reviewed it upstairs. Our knees touched again. This time, neither of us moved. You're not stopping me, he said quietly. I know, I replied. He kissed me again. It was different now. Intentional. My hands found his shirt. He lifted mine. We were in the guest room before I realized what was happening, clothes on the floor, breathless, lost. Afterward, I sat in silence, knees pulled to my chest, blanket over me. He reached for my hand. I didn't pull away. I know what this looks like, he said softly. But I'm not trying to mess with your life. You already have, I whispered. He left me there. I didn't move for a long time. The next morning, we acted normal. Too normal. The tension was gone, replaced by something more dangerous. Comfort. It wasn't just once. It didn't stop. Over the next week, we found reasons to meet alone. In the hallway. In the garage. Late at night, when the house was quiet. Every moment burned a little deeper. I knew what I was doing. I wasn't innocent. I wasn't confused. I was fully aware. And I kept choosing him anyway. My husband called from out of town that Friday. You sound tired, he said. Just a long week. Miss you, he added quickly. I paused. You too. I stared at my reflection in the microwave door after the call ended. My face looked the same. My voice sounded the same. But something in me was shifting. The next morning, I told my stepson we needed to talk. He was in the kitchen, eating cereal. He looked up, immediately alert.
We need to stop, I said.
He nodded slowly. Why now? Because I won't be able to live with myself if we keep doing this. But you already did. I flinched. That doesn't mean I want to destroy everything. I'm not asking you to. Then what are you asking? He didn't answer.
We didn't sleep together that night.
Or the next.
But the pull didn't vanish.
It only got stronger in the silence. One night, I walked past his room and paused. I heard music. Low, moody, familiar. I knocked. He opened the door, surprised but not startled.
Couldn't sleep, I said.
He stepped aside. I sat on the edge of the bed.
He sat beside me.
I wish we'd met under different circumstances, he said. I closed my eyes. Me too.
He reached for my hand.
I let him hold it. That's all we did. Just sat. But the weight of what had already happened made even that feel dangerous. In the morning, I left early. Went to the market. Took the long way home, trying to pretend I still had a version of myself that existed before this. But I didn't. And I wasn't sure I wanted her back. The illusion of control was long gone. I wasn't denying what it was anymore. I was too deep, and the lines had vanished. There was no plan, no endgame, just a string of moments I kept letting happen, knowing each one pulled me further into something I couldn't explain and didn't try to. We didn't talk about what we were doing. There weren't labels or promises. Just glances, touches, choices. Unspoken understanding. It wasn't passion for the sake of thrill. It felt heavier than that. More dangerous because it started to feel like home. He started noticing things about me even I'd forgotten. That I rubbed the inside of my wrist when I was anxious. That I avoided eye contact when I was trying to hide something. That I stopped playing music around the house when I was emotionally numb. My husband hadn't noticed those things in years. Maybe he never had. One afternoon, I passed by the mirror in the hallway and stopped. I looked more alive. That was the most damning part. The guilt hadn't faded, but it existed right next to this twisted sense of comfort, and the two were somehow coexisting. Then came the slip. A friend of my husband stopped by, someone I hadn't seen in a while. We chatted briefly. He looked around and asked, "Is your stepson home?" The word felt strange coming out of someone else's mouth. I paused too long before answering. "He's out." The man nodded, smiling. "He's grown up a lot. Doesn't really feel like a stepson anymore, does he?" I laughed, but it came out wrong. Forced. My stomach twisted. Later that night, I told him we needed to stop again. That this couldn't go on. That something would slip, someone would notice, or worse, he would find out. He didn't argue. He just looked tired. Like he already knew it wasn't the end. "We keep stopping," he said. "And we keep coming back." "I know," I whispered. "Why?" he asked. "I don't know. But I did." It wasn't just about being seen or touched or desired. It was about feeling awake again. It was about rediscovering a version of myself I'd buried. And yes, it was selfish. Immensely so. But it was real. And real had been missing for too long. The next week was uneventful on the surface. My husband returned from his trip. The three of us had dinner together like a normal family. We talked about work, weather, bills. Everyone played their role. My husband didn't suspect a thing. He never did. But I noticed everything. The way my stepson didn't look at me too long. How he kept his tone neutral. How I caught him clenching his jaw when my husband touched my arm during conversation. It was all too composed. A few nights later, I caught myself crying in the shower. Not out of regret, but exhaustion. Living in between two realities was breaking me down. I was still functioning, smiling, cooking, working, but there was a split inside me I didn't know how to mend. My husband made a comment about how quiet I'd been lately. "Is something wrong?" "No," I said quickly. "Just tired." "You've been tired for months." I almost said something. I almost told him. Not the details. Not the whole truth. But maybe a sliver of honesty about how disconnected I felt, how invisible I'd become. But then he stood up, rinsed his plate, and walked out of the kitchen, phone in hand, call already ringing. That silence was my answer. My stepson left for a short trip the next day. He needed to visit a friend in another city. I felt a wave of panic when he told me. Not because I was worried, because I didn't want him to go. I had gotten used to him being here. I didn't like the empty space his absence left. I hated that I had grown dependent. While he was gone, I tried to refocus. I organized my closet, deleted messages, went through old journals. I found one entry from years ago, written right after I got married. It was full of hope. Pages of goals and promises to myself, about growth and happiness and loyalty. I read every line like it belonged to someone else. He came back on a Thursday. We didn't speak the first night. We didn't need to. But when I passed him in the hall, his fingers brushed mine briefly, and it said everything. I knew what we were doing. We weren't just cheating. We were falling. He started writing again. Personal pieces. Short stories. Things he didn't let anyone else read, but he let me. They weren't explicit, but the themes were clear. longing, betrayal, misplaced connection. I saw myself in every paragraph. Maybe that was the point. I didn't stop him. I started dreaming about what life might look like if things were different. If I had met him before I met his father. If we had been strangers who met at a bookstore or coffee shop and didn't have a shared home with family ties and years of complication. The fantasy didn't last long, but it was seductive. He asked me once, "Do you think you'll ever tell him?" I didn't answer. Because the answer was no. I wouldn't. Not because I wanted to protect my husband, but because I wasn't willing to burn my entire life to the ground. I didn't have the courage. And I knew that made me a coward. "I wish I could have met you first," he said. Me too. That's the thing about wrong timing. It doesn't erase the right feelings. Eventually, things started slipping in subtle ways. I forgot to log out of the shared computer once, and closed a tab too late. My husband asked if I needed help with something. I said no. He didn't push. Later that night, he asked if everything was okay between us. It was the first time in a long time that he sounded present. "Why do you ask?" "You've been different. Quieter. Distant." "I've been tired," I repeated. He looked at me, really looked, and for a second I thought he saw it. But then he nodded and said he understood. Crisis averted. For now. But I knew the house of cards was wobbling. I started preparing for the inevitable. Not a confession, but an unraveling. Emotional, logistical, whatever form it might take. Something was going to give. It had to. I started pulling away again. Not in big ways. Just less contact, fewer conversations, more guarded glances. My stepson noticed. He didn't fight it, but the sadness in his eyes was loud. One night, I sat outside after everyone was asleep, staring up at the dark sky. I whispered a question I didn't expect to say out loud. "Am I in love with him?" The answer terrified me, because I wasn't sure. But I also wasn't sure I wasn't. It didn't end with a scream or some grand discovery. It ended quietly, the way some storms do, so slowly that you don't realize they're over until you step outside and feel nothing. We had drifted before, but this time it felt different. I didn't know if it was guilt finally cementing itself into my decisions or if the fantasy had simply run its course, but I woke up one morning and the weight of it all was heavier than the pull. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I just felt still. He noticed. He always did. "You're leaving me again," he said, not as an accusation, just a truth. "I never had the right to stay," I replied. Neither of us moved. We stood in the same kitchen where so much had started, 2 feet apart and already miles away. He didn't ask me to explain. Maybe because we both understood there was nothing left to say that wouldn't make it worse. I spent the next few days making myself smaller. No glances, no excuses to linger in shared spaces. I immersed myself in the routine of normalcy. Laundry, cooking, polite small talk with my husband. I pretended the last few months hadn't happened. It was the only way to survive. But pretending didn't erase the damage. It didn't undo the lies or stop the memories from ambushing me at the worst moments. A certain song, the scent of his cologne, the way he used to write my name in the corner of his notes just to make me smile. Every little detail was a reminder I couldn't shake off. He started going out more. Later nights. Less presence in the house. My husband mentioned it once, something like, "I think he's dealing with stuff. You know how it is being that age." I just nodded. There was a part of me that wanted him to move on.
To hate me.
To find someone closer to his world. Someone who wouldn't have to choose between survival and desire. But there was also a part that kept listening for the door at night, waiting for the sound of him returning. One night, I found a letter, folded neatly, and slid into the corner of my drawer. No name on it, but I knew it was from him. I didn't open it right away. I stared at it for hours, afraid of what it might say, afraid of what it might confirm. When I finally read it, it was short. A few paragraphs, handwritten in small, careful script. He didn't ask me to come back. He didn't say he hated me. He just wrote what he felt, that he would never forget any of it, that it changed him, that he didn't regret it even if it ruined everything. He ended it with, "If this is where we stop, I hope you find yourself again, even if it's without me." I folded it back and placed it under a pile of receipts, unsure if I'd ever have the courage to throw it away. Weeks passed, then months. The house reset itself. My husband and I fell into old rhythms. Empty, but functional. We went to dinners with friends, posed for photos, made future plans we didn't believe in. I smiled because that's what I was supposed to do. He didn't notice anything different. But I was different. I couldn't unsee what I'd seen in myself. The version of me that had surfaced in those stolen moments, she wasn't gone. Just quieter now. Contained. My stepson eventually moved out. Claimed it was time for space, for independence, for a fresh start. He didn't make a scene. Just packed, thanked my husband, hugged him. When he turned to me, we locked eyes for less than a second. That was it. No words. No closure. Just a look heavy with everything we weren't allowed to say. After he left, I cleaned his room. Not because it needed it, but because I had to. I found a book under the bed, something I'd once mentioned I loved when I was younger. I didn't know he remembered. I sat on the edge of the bed and flipped through it, then closed it and pressed it against my chest until I couldn't breathe. Time did what time does. It softened the sharp edges, but didn't remove them. I never told my husband. Not out of fear anymore, but because I knew it would destroy a life I was still responsible for maintaining. And maybe that was cowardice. Or maybe it was a kind of penance. To carry the secret alone. Eventually, I stopped checking his social media. I stopped scanning unfamiliar numbers, stopped walking slower past places he used to like. I tried to let it fade. But there were cracks. They showed up when I least expected. Like the time I was asked to speak at a charity event and my voice trembled halfway through. Not from nerves, but from a song playing faintly in the background that he once played for me. Or the time I saw someone wearing his jacket at the grocery store and my entire body reacted before my mind caught up. Some things don't leave. They just learn to stay quiet. Years later, my husband asked if I was happy. It wasn't a trap. It was genuine. He looked at me across the table with the kind of quiet concern that made me wonder if he knew more than he ever let on. I said, yes. It wasn't the truth. But it wasn't a lie either. I had made peace with the choice. I had paid the price. After he went to bed that night, I opened my drawer and pulled out the letter. The paper had softened with time, corners curled slightly. I read it again, this time slower. And when I finished, I smiled. Not because it felt good, but because it reminded me I had once felt something that intense, that terrifying, that honest. That mattered. Even if everything else was wrong. There are some connections that don't survive reality. They aren't meant to, but that doesn't make them meaningless. They are scars that remind us we were alive once. Fully.
Completely.
And no matter how carefully I stitched myself back together, I would always carry that mark. The story didn't have a happy ending. It wasn't designed for that. It was chaos and clarity, collision and consequence. But it was real. And sometimes real is all you get.